I'm told it's showtime. Welcome everybody to the ICAI Mid-Atlantic Conference. We are all really excited to have you here. I'm Dr. David Rettinger. I'm Professor of Psychological Science and Director of Academic Integrity Programs at the University of Mary Washington. I'm also President Emeritus of ICAI and a member of the Program Committee for the conference. On behalf of ICAI, welcome back to day 2 of this 6th annual Mid-Atlantic Regional Conference, formerly known as the Virginia Academic Integrity Working Group. We're growing. I'd like to extend thanks again to the conference co-hosts, the USM Kirwan Center for Academic Innovation and the University of Maryland Global Campus. They've done an amazing job, and we're absolutely grateful to them for everything they've done to make this different conference feel completely normal. We're looking forward to another exciting day of presentations, discussions, and panels centering on the conference theme, which is reimagining academic integrity in a moment of rapid change. Of course, COVID-19 is part of that change, but lots of other things are changing right now, and today's panelists would be very much interested in talking about all of them. Today, we'll hear first from a distinguished panel on the topic, Academic Integrity in a Pandemic, Reflections from a Year on Zoom. Then after that will be a short break, and then we'll have our lightning talk session split into 2 rooms. Please see your participant program for more information on the topics and how to join in those sessions. After the lightning talks, we'll have a town hall hosted by ICAI board members, including some of those on the panel here today, where you can learn more about how to maximize your engagement with ICAI and some of our resources and support for institutions. Immediately following the town hall, we'll have a final opportunity for networking amongst participants by topic area, and that will conclude the conference. We'll be sending out an electronic conference evaluation to you, and I ask that you complete it and send it back to us. This is how we make this annual conference better and more responsive to your needs. Throughout the day today, please remember to remain muted whenever you are not speaking and to use chat functions for any questions. So the plan for today's panel is that I will now briefly introduce the panelists, who will talk for about 5 minutes each, introducing themselves and giving some initial thoughts. I'll then review and take questions from you from the chat. And if there is time remaining, I'll ask some questions for the panelists as well. So I'd like to let you know who our panelists are first. First will be Matthew Scruggs. He's Assistant Dean of Students at the University of Lynchburg here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Azalea Hulbert, board member at ICAI and Director of Academic Integrity at West Virginia University. James Orr, who's also a board member at ICAI and is the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Strategic Enrollment at the University of Memphis. And Nina Burgess, who's the Honor Council President at my institution, the University of Mary Washington, and an undergraduate student. So let's start first with Matthew, who's going to introduce himself and give us a little context.
Thanks so much, Dave. So as Dr. Rettinger mentioned, my name is Matt Scruggs. I'm the Assistant Dean of Students here at the University of Lynchburg. Served in this capacity now starting year number 4, but have worked in student conduct, working with honor codes and conduct codes now for about almost 8 years. And my primary focus here at the institution pre-COVID has been the in upholding, educating, and enforcement of our honor code and student conduct code, along with our associate dean of students. And this year, as many of us have experienced, have also taken on much of the COVID response in terms of developing expectations for safety precautions, helping to identify different expectations as to mask wearing, in egress and entrance doors, guest policies, etc. Since much of that has had to be modified to ensure a safe return to campus. The University of Lynchburg, we opened in the fall. We stayed open throughout the fall, and we have opened again in the spring with a variety of in-person classes, hybrid classes, and solely online, synchronous as well as asynchronous classes. But much of the efforts to provide for a safe campus certainly falls on the entire institutional community, but as far as addressing any type of deviations, and we've been very particular and specific about referring to those actions as deviations and not policy violations or violations of the honor code and conduct code. That has become much of my focus this fall and entering into the spring semester, is just adhering and helping students adhere to those pandemic expectations. And when they fall short of those expectations, I'm working to hold them accountable and put in intervention measures to ensure future compliance, as well as the safety of they themselves, as well as everyone around them. So, Dr. Roger, I think it's about as good as I can give right now.
That's fabulous, Dr. Scruggs. Thank you very much. Now we'll turn to Dr. Azalea Hulbert from the University of West Virginia.
All right, thank you, David. As you said, my name is Azalea Hulbert, and I'm the Director of Academic Integrity at WVU. And I've been here in this role and at WVU for about 2.5 years, but have been involved in academic integrity related work in various capacities for several years before that. But in my role here, I am the person who holds primary responsibility for education and outreach, policy development, and ultimately case management when there are violations of our academic integrity policy. And over the past year, we've really seen a substantial shift in a couple of regards. First, I see a continually growing need for more education and outreach. And second, we like many other institutions, have seen a rise in cases of reported misconduct. I'll start with the need for greater education, and I've seen that stemming from a couple of different factors, but the one that I've been hearing about most recently is related to the utter lack of connection between students and their instructors and students and their peers, especially when we think about freshmen who are coming to campus, sometimes virtually, sometimes actually in person, but taking a lot of their courses online. They're struggling to build connection and are engaging in efforts through platforms like GroupMe and Snapchat that aren't university authorized and that give them an opportunity to easily cross some lines in terms of inappropriate collaboration. And so we've been working to respond educationally while also putting systems in place to allow students to better communicate and collaborate. But we're also, it's not just the students that we're needing to educate. This has been a good moment to work with campus partners like the Teaching and Learning Commons to remind our faculty of good assessment practice, of good techniques to promote integrity and prevent misconduct. And so that's been a really big change this past year, is just the need for even more continuous education. In terms of rising numbers, I think that is largely attributable not just to the lack of connection, but to the effects of pervasive stress on students who would otherwise be unlikely to cheat. In a lot of our exam cheating cases this year, they've involved students who have very strong historical academic performance and often aspire to enroll in professional programs in the future. And that's not a group that we've historically seen academic misconduct from, but it just seems that the stress combined with the opportunity that's available in online testing environments has offered all too tempting a prospect for some of these students. And so we've seen some growing pains within my office. We are part of the Office of Student Conduct, so we've also seen some of those COVID-related cases that are also just putting stress on the system. And so we've seen some challenges that I'll touch on briefly. Technological, having to conduct hearings, everything we've been doing related to students is remote, so all of our meetings are remote. That's a direction that we were moving anyway. WVU, the system has a couple of branch campuses, and we have a large international student population. So we've seen some situations where remote work would be a good thing anyway, and this pushed us in that direction. But it's introduced some challenges because in terms of student privacy, making sure that we're being equitable to students who don't have the needed technology or who don't want to share a glimpse into their private living space. We have to be aware of that. But then in terms of our legal obligations, we don't necessarily know who is in the room in those circumstances. So we've had to navigate through those challenges and come up with ways to address those. But I'll conclude with what I think has been the biggest challenge is really the human cost through all of this. As a conduct officer, I frequently see students who are in some form of distress, and it's really tough to be sitting on one end of a computer screen with a student who's crying, and to lack that human connection. As simple as it may sound, I didn't realize what a loss it would be not to be able to hand a student a Kleenex when they're having a moment of crisis. The distance can be a useful de-escalating tool, but it really has made some of these conversations tough, and put some distance there. So, moving forward, there are some things we'll take out of COVID and probably continue on at WVU, but I am very much looking forward to being able to be back in person with my colleagues and our students here when it is the right time to do so. And I will stop there for now, David.
Thank you, Azalea. I apologize in advance. My dogs are getting excited about the panel. Let me remind you all that we'd very much like to hear your questions in the, or see your questions in the chat. So don't forget, questions or just topic prompts would be great. Next, we'll turn to Dr. James Orr at the University of Memphis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I serve as Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Strategic Enrollment here at the University of Memphis. In that role, I oversee your traditional enrollment functions. I also oversee student success initiatives as well, and our accreditation initiatives. I've been working with academic integrity now for the last 15 years. I bring a unique perspective because I've worked with academic integrity initiatives on 4 different campuses. One of the campuses was a campus that didn't have your traditional honor code or academic integrity initiatives occurring. And they moved to this outreach and how do we create a culture of integrity and honesty? And they created what oftentimes you'll see in the literature, and I know not everyone likes hearing that terminology, but the modified honor code. Then I was at an institution that had a very strong, steep, student-led honor system that was very much so part of its culture and in the institution, and I led the honor system there. And then I've worked at institutions where they didn't have an honor code or a true defined academic integrity policy. And so when I think about academic integrity, I think about it from those holistic perspectives. COVID-19 has brought some unique challenges. And what I want to do is just highlight 3 things that we've been doing to address those challenges. And I think it's important to think about. And number 1 is that more important than ever before is this idea of thinking about our pedagogy. And what do we do to ensure that students are engaged in the class and that it's a learning environment that really focuses on student learning. Some institutions have been doing online education for a long time and they're really good at it. And it's a little bit easier for those institutions to transfer into this environment than institutions that don't. One of the things that we did at the University of Memphis is because we've been doing online education for a long time, is that we held a faculty institute this past summer where we encourage faculty to come. And we really talk to them about those things that you could do to make a connection and really promote student learning in the online environment. And if time permits, I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the next idea was this idea of how do we educate our students on what constitutes honor and academic integrity violation and how do they avoid it? And then how do we also educate our faculty? So what we did is know the code sessions for students. The second week of classes, we offered virtual sessions for students where we went over what constitutes a violation of the honor code, how do you avoid violating the honor code, but also what is so important is how do you engage in student success initiatives and use the resources that we have available. And then we did the same thing for faculty as well, to give faculty some strategies for teaching and learning in the online environment. So the last point that I'll list is that engagement is absolutely critical. When we think about how we adjudicate cases, when we think about how we educate students, how do we engage the student is a critical piece. And the other thing that I'll challenge everyone to think about is that just because you see what you perceive as a rise in cases of academic misconduct, that may be the case that more academic misconduct is occurring, but it may not be. It may be that we're more vigilant in the online environment because of the traditional connotations that come along with it that make us more aware or notice it more when it's occurring. And I would encourage everyone that when it happens and you see reports, the fact that faculty are reporting cases and the students are reporting cases is a good thing because it creates an opportunity for us to use those instances as teachable moments for our students.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Oh, go ahead. I just want to remind everyone, this is Nina Burgess, who is a senior at the University of Mary Washington and the the elected president of our Student Honor Council.
Thank you, Dr. Rettinger. Like he said, I am the president of the University of Mary Washington Honor Council. Prior to coming into this position in, what was it, April, I was a representative for 3 years. So I was sitting hearings and advising students. Our council is mostly student run, and we deal with lying, cheating, and stealing cases. Our experience dealing with COVID, mostly, I think uh, the main challenge was that we went virtual, and so that just involved a lot of man hours and setting clear expectations for the people involved in our process. What do we expect for people in terms of maintaining confidentiality, maintaining professionalism, maintaining some of the standards that we had instituted while we were in person. And so, that was difficult, something that took a lot of my brain space in terms of thinking about it. And so I think mainly what helped us was being creative, being open, being communicative with everyone involved, and saying, okay, this is how things are going to be done. This is what you need to do in order to maintain these standards. Aside from going virtual and having our virtual hearings, we also used our expedited sanctioning process a lot. And so that's more of a mediation process between students and faculty and the people on the council to come up with the sanction that's also going to educate the student and help them learn from their experience. This process was very helpful in terms of ensuring that we didn't use so many resources on Zoom, and that we were able to get cases resolved efficiently. Overall, I think the response to our approach was pretty positive. Like James said, we got a 34% increase in our cases. And so while that is bad or not necessarily what we want, we do see it as a positive in the fact that people still care about academic integrity. The students and the faculty, they're willing to go through the process and learn about their mistakes. And, I think, that's a good thing that we can take from this experience. And then similar to what Miss Dr. Hubert said, making sure that we are maintaining engagement with the student body and, keeping that human connection was definitely a difficult part for us to manage, and we're still sort of managing with it now. And it really highlights the importance of education and staying engaged. And I think that's something that we want to continue in the future once we get out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and just using all possible channels to communicate the value of academic integrity for both the students and the faculty members in a creative way. So thank you.
David, may I build off a point that Nina just raised? That was a really good point. So this is one of the things that I've been talking about a long time, is that she mentioned that they utilize their expedited resolution process. And I think that where possible, even as we look at our policies, that it's important that we remember that not all cases of academic misconduct should have to be adjudicated through a panel. And oftentimes, because we're trying to protect due process and preserve due process, we design policies in which the cases have to go through these long hearing processes. But what I found is that some of the most transformative experiences that can occur is when a student is able to sit down one-on-one with someone and talk about what occurred, or a smaller group, and usually that results in the student having a greater understanding of the expectations. It results in the cases being resolved faster, which also allows the sanction to occur closer to the incident. And more importantly, it reduces the adversarial and legal environment, right? So no matter how good we do with our panels, there's always this adversarial nature that occurs. And if your policies will allow you to, it's absolutely critical to remember that not all cases of academic misconduct require a huge hearing. And if your policies don't allow you to do that, then I think that looking at things like Mary Washington has, Virginia Tech has, Texas A&M, Kansas State, those type of institutions, reviewing those policies to see how you may incorporate a expedited or an administrative, some type of resolution that doesn't require a huge hearing panel could be really beneficial.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I was actually in the midst of typing into the chat that James is too polite to toot his own horn, but the policy of Virginia Tech, which is where we based our Mary Washington policy, James was responsible for that largely, and it's an excellent piece of work and gives you a great sense of just how that might happen on a campus. So your comments have given me a nice set of questions, but I would like to turn first to the chat because there's a number of really interesting thoughts there. You can see them all. I'd love to start by talking about Andel Rossi's question about appropriate collaboration. So starting with you, Azalea, how do you guide students toward appropriate collaboration when they're not physically together as often as they normally might be?
Yes, so there are a few different ways we're doing this at WVU. And this is one of those things that, last semester, a few faculty started expressing concern that they had heard that students were collaborating in group chats and they were afraid that it was going to cross a line. But we've started actually getting some more tangible reports with either students or faculty who are joining those group chats and seeing like actual evidence of inappropriate collaboration. And so, when we have those cases, we're taking kind of a two-pronged approach depending on what's actually happening. With identifiable misconduct, we're addressing that consistent with our policy. But we're also offering faculty the option to send out a very targeted message to everyone in their class that basically says, hey, we know that there are these group chats. We understand that you're trying to build connections and collaborate, and these are all good things, but we want to remind you of the boundaries. There's certain assignments that are inappropriate to collaborate on. There are better resources that you can reach out to your TAs, your instructors. So we're in the process of starting to implement those educational reminders to students, just again to put some guidelines in place and to point them to better resources. We're also experimenting with a new platform called Circle In that we recently obtained an institutional license for, and it's essentially a group chat platform, but students have to sign on using their university credentials. So what they're doing is trackable. It connects them with TAs and their instructor who can also join. It eliminates the possibility of them using fake names for engagement in the chat. I know some departments also have social media accounts where their TAs will hang out on there during the hours that undergrads are awake and the rest of the adult world is usually sleeping, so they can get timely answers to their questions instead of just reaching out to their peers through group chats. And so we're trying to remind students and drive traffic to these alternative group collaboration platforms. Because we've just signed this deal with, or this institutional license with Circle In, the jury is still out on how widely it'll be used and how effective it will be. It certainly may drive some of this more illegitimate behavior even further underground, but that's why we're taking a multi-pronged approach to educate, to point students to better resources. And I think for the majority of students who are really just trying to use these group chats to connect and to and then their behavior kind of crosses the line without them deliberately thinking through that that's what they meant to do. I think for a lot of them, these alternative group platforms, these reminders will help And then we can continue to address the more serious kinds of academic misconduct as we become aware of them.
Other
One of the
thoughts from
things,
the panel?
well, one of the things that Azalea mentioned that I think is really important and that we try to encourage faculty to do is that because of the age that we live in, we know that students are going to communicate, they're going to engage in these discussions. So as much as you can have them occur in the learning management system, maybe through discussion boards, that allows you as the instructor to see what's happening. And so when students begin to cross over the line, you can interject. But it also creates an environment where students don't feel that they have to go to an outside platform in order to discuss concepts and get that engagement.
This may not be too much of a change from previous, pre-COVID, but just really trying to encourage students to have those open and honest conversations with their faculty members and professors to say, what is appropriate in this new environment? What would I be allowed to do? What are some of the assignments that would fall into a collaboration? What assignments do need to be more of a individual assignment? We're a university, Google campus, and so a lot of our actions take place within either the Google platform or in our kind of Blackboard system called Moodle. And so using those platforms to help to promote effective engagement, but ultimately just trying to encourage students to have conversations to better understand, so they're not tiptoeing into those gray areas of, well, I think it's okay, but maybe it's not. And again, that learning opportunity can apply to so many other different factors moving forward of having those realistic conversations.
Sticking with the theme of the role of technology in this new and uncharted environment, why don't we start with Nina, since you didn't jump in on the last one, and let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that as a student you feel like technology has both helped and maybe challenged our students at UMW in terms of academic integrity.
I think mainly the challenge is building connection with your faculty members and ensuring that the instructions that they give over Zoom or even on Canvas are interpreted in a way so that way they don't wind up in the situation where they are brought before us. And so I think that that's a main challenge. It's also made, I guess, the confines of you not being in a room with other students that maybe can see you. So you're taking a test and the stakes are not as high in terms of oh, if someone sees me cheat, like, well, then no one's here to actually call me on it. So it just makes it your threshold lower just takes the guardrails off of what would keep you from cheating in the first place in an in-person setting. And I think that that's very very scary and very just something that we need to work to address in terms of keep maintaining communication, making sure that this still is important even in COVID, and just making sure that the students are aware of that.
How about the rest of the panel? Are there ways that technology has that you maybe have learned about, or things that have improved technologically? And if anyone could throw in a bit about lockdown browsers, that would be I think a topic that's of interest to the audience.
I'm happy to chime in there. Lockdown browsers have been the conversation of the moment at WVU, as I'm sure at many institutions. But first, I want to touch on something that you said, Nina, which is, again, that these guardrails are missing, that students suddenly realize that they're not being observed. And I think that's why we've seen students that wouldn't otherwise, that haven't previously cheated, I won't say wouldn't otherwise, but haven't historically cheated. The technology, the anonymity has really impacted their behavior. And we've also seen faculty who've really tried to be accommodating and not make test taking difficult for students they've unfortunately been the ones sometimes that have the biggest issues. For example, faculty who don't use lockdown browser, who give students an extended period of time to take the exam, they're coming from a good place. They want to give students the best opportunity to take an exam in a relaxed environment without feeling the pressure of scrutiny. But then some of those students are taking advantage of that to Google Answers, to post questions online and wait for the answers. And so, lockdown browser is something that we encourage faculty to think about as part of their test taking approach. It's kind of an approach of, first, think through if there are other assessments or other ways you can get through this that don't require the traditional timed exam. But if you do need to give an exam, if you're going to use technology to make it go more smoothly, randomize your questions, pull from a larger test bank, write your own questions if you can, so that they are identifiable as yours. That way, if we have to start an investigation into answers that have been found online, then we know whose questions they are. Use the lockdown browser, but don't become overly reliant on that. I think that's the message that I've really tried to underscore, because for a lot of different reasons. First of all, depending on the room someone's in, there could be someone who comes in after the student has done a environment check, and they could be in there helping them. The student could be using, even if their browser is locked down, if they're not on video, they could be using a phone or another device. And so all of these tools we've been talking so much about this year are just that. They are tools. None of them are magic bullets. None of them solve all of these problems. We can't say, okay, just make students use a video proctoring system and everything will be fine. We have to use each of these technological tools we have, all of the safeguards that can be put in place through our content and learning management systems. We have to use all of those together. So yes, that was a very long-winded way of saying that technology can help, but it requires someone who's pretty well acquainted with how to put that all together. That's why working with things like our Teaching and Learning Center here at WVU have been really important this year, because they have the experts who can help faculty figure out the nuts and bolts of using technology to deter misconduct.
Great, thank you very much. Lots of other questions circling around, continuing the theme of technology, but broadening it a little bit. There was a question about contract cheating in the chat that I wanted to address, because a lot of contract cheating is happening through online sources. And so it's not all, but it's not just a technology issue, but it is a technology issue. So have you seen indications that there's an increase in contact cheating during the pandemic? And how have you attempted to address this? James, maybe this would be a place to start with you.
Yeah, when I think about contract cheating, there's a couple of things that, in cheating in general, I'll step back a little bit, is that I think that the best way to address cheating, whether it's contract cheating or not, is from a pedagogy perspective. So that when we think about how we are designing our assessments, that we're doing things that require students to use synthesis and analysis in the online environment, as much as we can engage the student and require the student to maybe turn on their camera at times. Those things are very helpful. In terms of addressing contract cheating, I think it's also important that we educate students on what our expectations are. So what are our expectations around using, and I won't name any of the sites, but using sites where students can upload homework assignments. So is that something that we allow, or is that something that's not allowed? And that we be very clear with students in regards to our expectation in those regards. If we suspect that some form of academic misconduct has occurred, again, I think those one-on-one conversations with the student in which we ask them to explain how you completed the assignment, why you chose this approach, why did you choose these references versus another set of references? And having those conversations allows us to see when contract cheating is occurring. But again, I think it's important that we educate students on our expectations, that we try to design our assessments where it requires synthesis and analysis, and that we also understand that it's important that if we suspect academic misconduct, that we have a conversation with students about it to really determine if it's occurred. And the last point, going back to the previous question, I think technology is good, as Azalea said, as a tool, but I think that we shouldn't rely solely on technology as a way to identify and stop cheating. Because really our goal is to create cultures of integrity and honesty. I mean, we have some campuses, and I'm not advocating this either way, that even in person, they weren't holding proctored examinations. If you go to UVA, many times their examinations are not proctored, right? And David, is that where it is, where you all are? Yeah. So it's really about trying to create this culture where we don't cheat, because that's something that we don't do at our institution. But where we can get off on the wrong track is if we're trying to develop a very sophisticated technology system where we're trying to track and identify all the cheating that's occurring. So it's a tool, it should be used, but it shouldn't be what we rely on.
Thank you. That's great. Don't forget, other panelists, feel free to jump in. I'll give a little bit of a pause there. Let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about technology. There's some really interesting philosophical questions in the chat as well. We don't want to be purely talking about practice. And so one that I'd really like to start with, and maybe we'll address this to Matt as a place to start, which is in one of the panels yesterday, a session yesterday, the pandemic was described as a reason for academic misconduct in a particular situation, but it might, or a cause, but it might also be thought of as the context. Discuss. No, but in all seriousness, how are you taking into account the differences in life during a pandemic, and how are you thinking about it with respect to all of the aspects of your education and your academic integrity processes? So this could be for anyone, but why don't we start with Matt?
I think it's a great question. And I do think that the pandemic has had an impact on individual behavior that we wouldn't typically see. I think Azalea brought up a great point that students that one typically we would think engage in this behavior, it's leading them to do so. I think that the pandemic has produced a level of stress that many of these students have probably not seen before. And to add that on top of the stress that many of our students put on themselves as far as succeeding academically, that it's leading them to make decisions that they probably wouldn't typically make. And so it's certainly a factor of every conversation that I have with students. It's certainly around some high level, what we call deviations from our COVID expectations. But even in the conduct realm and of having that, I just need to be with people. I need to engage with people. Like I can't just constantly walk around with a mask on and not be able to hang out with folks later on tonight. And it's so trying to figure out ways to help them engage with students, but do so in a safe manner, do so in a manner that's within policies and within expectations. But also when we're looking to address any type of misconduct or any type of deviation, knowing that we already have a lot of factors that go into our decision-making process, aggravating factors, mitigating factors, et cetera. And just recognizing that some students, this pandemic and what they're experiencing back home with, my family lost members of the job, or I've lost members of my family, and now this is adding on to it. And I do well in in-person classes, and now all of my classes are online, and I'm not seeing my professors as regularly. And taking all that into account when students are deviating from the university's expectations, probably it is a mitigating factor with our sanctioning process, our intervention measures, because ultimately we want the students to learn from this, to learn what the expectations are and to learn the impact that deviating from these pandemic expectations can have. But we also want to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe. We also want to make sure that we're still upholding our policies as noted from day one of this semester, of this year. So I hope that addresses the question as far as how does pandemic serve as a context for some of our addressing moving forward.
And building off of that, I also think that we have to remember when we are thinking about academic integrity is that in the context that the pandemic has created is that one, many of our faculty are not accustomed to teaching in the online or hybrid environment. So let me tell you, especially if you're doing hybrid, which is what a lot of campuses are doing, it's much more difficult to teach in a hybrid setting than it is in an in-person setting or a completely on-ground setting. So when we're thinking about acts of academic misconduct that may be what some people may call a gray area or where the instructions explain, we have to remember that our faculty are also operating in an environment, in a context that they may be not accustomed to. And our students are learning in an environment that they also may not be accustomed to. So what does that mean? That means that when we think about how we address academic misconduct, we have to do it from the ethos or the culture that we're trying to create. We also have to think about how are we educating students on what the expectations are and how we deliver our material, but then while we're still following our policies and procedures and holding people accountable. I saw one person listed in the chat, would we hold their hands and is acts of kindness and patience so that they have their doubts, which is a very compelling argument, because this idea is that when I say approach it from the pedagogy in terms of how we address it, that's only one prong of it. And the other prong is that we do have to hold students accountable when they commit acts of academic misconduct. So we're not excusing that, but what we're also doing is using it as a teachable moment.
I'd like to build off something you said there, James, which is that, yes, this is a context that our students are existing in, but we're all existing in it. You can see from my background probably that I'm working from home. I've been working here for a year with a spouse and a preschooler and a very grumpy dog. And that's not how I really enjoy taking on my daily work, if I'm honest. There are parts of it I enjoy, but there's certainly some added stress. And so all of us are working in this strange context. We've all made adaptations and as a professional, I'm still held to a high standard and expected to do my work and to do so in an ethical manner. And so I think it's entirely reasonable to have those same expectations for students. But at the same time, it is a mitigating factor sometimes. We have to consider what students are telling us. That's why those meetings with students are so important, so that they can share what they are personally dealing with and going through. And I've seen a lot of faculty actually be more lenient. I'm still combing through the data from our fall violations compared to prior years, but anecdotally, and I think it will be borne out by the data, warnings were given a lot more than they have been in the past. Assignment failure has been a lot more common than it has in the past. We're seeing a lot fewer faculty failing students for entire courses or reducing their grade in those courses, because they recognize that these circumstances are unusual and they just want to make sure that the students, that they have an opportunity to correct that behavior, receive some education, and hopefully not do this again. So, a bit of a balance, yes, accountability, but we can also consider this as a unique context that we're all going through together and make accommodations as appropriate given each unique case.
I promised myself I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to give myself one intervention into the conversation. Last I checked, we're educators. And so for us to take the approach that they should know how to do all these things before they get to us is to abdicate our responsibility to take them from where they arrive at our institutions to a place where they can apply the ethical principles, which are frankly quite arbitrary, in academia. So most of our students will not go on to be academics, and knowing those rules are not as important as knowing how to figure out what the ethical rules are in an environment and apply them in a way to satisfy both society's and your own moral and ethical objections. So for us to say, yep, we're just going to punish them, and whether or not in a pandemic, we're not going to show grace. The goal at the end of the day is to graduate students who understand our expectations and can apply them effectively. Our goal is not to weed out the people who can't hack it, although sometimes that's necessary, as James pointed out. Our goal is to educate. And so to the extent that we show grace, flexibility, and mostly lead with our education, yes, pedagogy, then it's the extent to which we're going to serve our students.
And what David just pointed out is even what the courts say to us. So if we're thinking about just punishing them, the reason why they give us so much deference is because they say that we are educational institutions. And that because we're educational institutions, they give us the academic deference when we are addressing situations of academic misconduct. And if many of you have heard me talk a lot, you know that when I talk about educating, that may be sometimes that is that may be a redo of a paper. It may be a zero on the assignment. Sometimes that may be failure in the course. Like Matt's been doing student conduct for a long time, and I've suspended students, and students have come back and said that that was one of the most transformative experiences that they've had. But we have to take into consideration the context. So is it fair that we suspend a student who has plagiarized on an assignment in the current environment? It may be, but it may not be. And if, as long as education is at the heart of what we're doing and saying, how can this be a learning experience for the student, then we'll fall in a good place.
Well, and I think, to add on to James's point there, if there are opportunities to keep students at an institution where we know the strength of our resources, where we know that there are counseling centers, where we know that there are academic resources centers, where we know that there are career service centers, individuals that I imagine many of us got into the educational realm because we do care about students and we want to see them be successful. And if there's an opportunity to suspend or opportunity to keep a student in school and see that student grow from this experience, flourish because of the resources and the hands that are there to help them grow, I think that's a valuable part of the maturation process for our students. And I love one of the comments noted here by Ariel about emphasis on being more human. I think that's probably, if we were to have to identify an adjective to describe this panel, it's being human. It's the engagement piece. It's the one-on-one conversations piece. It's what I am missing because I have to wear a mask, or because I have to limit the number of people I'm interacting with, or all my classes are online in an asynchronous format and I don't get to have that interaction or that group work. And so missing that human interaction, missing that human engagement. And so when we are making decisions and having conversations with students, recognizing that they are bringing to the table things that are going on back home, things that they are seeing in the media, on the news, and that are impacting their circumstances, and having to have that understanding of, well, if I'm in your shoes, how can I best help you? What would I want someone to say to best help me? And how can I best support you through this difficult time, whether it be at the institution or back home? So I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunities as administrators in the honor code and conduct code realm to give students an opportunity for grace and an opportunity for growth and learning.
Yeah, and I think what Dr. Scruggs said about resources is definitely very important on both ends, both as a faculty member and as a student, because of the flux that COVID has put us in. Some students may not know that these resources are available or how to access these resources. So just, telling your students as a faculty member or as a honor council member, which I'm recognizing now and I want to get into, is that these resources are available and that you can access them. They may be virtual, and that's just the name of the game right now, but they are here to help you, and this is how you can access them.
I would like to keep with Nina, because there's something that I think that the audience would really benefit from is you spent 3 years on on honor council panels determining both responsibility for and sanctions for your fellow students who have um, been found who've been reported for cheating of various kinds, as well as some other things. How do you balance, like, the fact that there's a need for accountability with your natural understanding of what it's like to be a student under stress?
Mm, that's that's a tough one. I think I so I try to put myself in the student's shoes, and just sort of recognizing that, uh, um, that I have different experiences from the other student, and also just uh, recognizing that we need to help them as much as possible in the sanctioning. So, giving them academic integrity seminar or writing workshop, and just ensuring that they are able to learn from this experience as much as possible. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but um,
Well,
Have you
Nina's response is like why I think students should be involved and why it's so critical that they're involved in academic integrity procedures if you can do that. Because a student, they're experiencing the stresses of other students. So when they see something that is egregious or something that just doesn't meet the mustard, they will hold their fellow students accountable. And oftentimes they'll hold them accountable to the extent where they begin to have to step out of their role as an honor council member and say, okay, let me put myself in this individual student's shoes. And I think that when we're trying to create learning communities that normalize integrity, if you have a student like Nina involved, because she just had to take herself out of it because she knows, she's like, I know that I don't care what excuse you have. The instructor was clear. I took that class, or I have friends who've taken that class, and this is clearly academic misconduct. Um, but they also can take themselves out of that particular situation and say, okay, but let me put myself in this individual student's shoes. And I think that when you have those voices balanced with faculty voices, then we end up landing in an appropriate place in terms of how we respond to academic dishonesty.
Awesome. So, big shift of gears, I think. I've heard a couple of you refer to collaborations with other campus offices. Nina referred to writing and academic integrity seminars and things like that. And I think Azalea also at one point mentioned those collaborations. So maybe turning back to you, Azalea, give Nina a chance to breathe. Could you talk about some of the fruitful ways in which you've collaborated with, starting particularly with the Writing Center, which was mentioned in the chat, but other campus allies, and how best to make value from those partnerships?
Mhm. Absolutely. So, WVU, we have around 25 to 30,000 students across our multiple campuses, and just by the nature of having that many students, it is hard for an office like mine to directly get in front of those students in a meaningful way. And so we really do rely on partnerships. One level of partnership is with faculty. Again, that's because they can get the message about the importance of academic integrity directly to students, and they can do so in a contextualized way by talking about what it means in their classes, what it means in their discipline for professionals in their field. And so that's one type of partnership we do rely on. But we've also developed some really productive partnerships with our writing studio, with our teaching and learning commons, and with some of our other programs that I'll talk about in a minute. Starting with the writing studio, they actually offer a sanction or an educational measure in partnership with us when we have students who are identified for plagiarism that's of the skill-based, or the lapse in skill-based variety, if you will, a student who's struggling with paraphrasing or appropriate citation practices, versus someone who engaged in contract cheating or just copied and pasted an entire paper from the internet. That we view as more behavioral, and we address the academic integrity behavior piece of it. But if it's a skill-based plagiarism issue, we require those students to work with the writing studio. They work with peer tutors who can really, again, speak their language, be on a level with them in terms of their experiences that they're going through all at the same time. We have both undergrad and grad tutors in our writing studio. And so if an undergrad student, they would be paired typically with another undergrad writing tutor. A grad student would either be paired with a grad tutor, or if it's something more advanced like a dissertation, we might pair them with a professional staff member to work through and help the student develop those skills. And so that's been a really exciting partnership that we really appreciate. With our Teaching and Learning Center, we've collaborated to put on some webinars for faculty, especially as we've responded to COVID and the pivot to online classes. We did some webinars in the fall related to that. And then we also work with individual units. Things that come to mind are the Honors College or tutoring offices or athletics, where we have folks there who have these smaller groups of students, and they reach out and want to think about new ways to educate those groups of students. And so we use those both as an opportunity to directly engage with students and provide some pertinent education related to academic integrity, but also as a way to test out different models for education. For example, I'm working with an academic unit right now to train some undergrad mentors that they have who teach their freshman intro classes. And we're going to work on teaching those mentors how to lead conversation about ethical decision making related to academic integrity. They'll get those skills, I'll be able to work with that small group. And then in the fall, they'll start educating through some case study analysis and other forms of education. They'll start working with the freshman class in this particular academic unit. And if that's something that is successful, then we can start to apply that model more broadly. And so those partnerships, though, I see in the chat, Stephanie mentioned International Student Center. That's another one. Just these smaller offices. Oftentimes the students in those departments have specific needs or challenges that may need to be addressed as well. And so we can target education, but then hopefully expand it once we have some successful models in place with those partners.
Are there other examples of those partnerships that we might want to highlight? Nope. The pet partnerships in the background are very interesting. So that leads to a related question. The notion of the teachable moment, Tricia Bertram-Gallant's phrasing for this, I think we've all adopted that framework. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that helps you make a moment, either faculty or you from where you sit, helps make academic misconduct a teachable moment? James, maybe.
Yeah, I think how we approach the conversations when we do have the conversations, and I do think that in most instances when academic dishonesty has occurred, or we suspect that there should be a conversation with the student. And I like to approach it with sort of a four-pronged way. The first is that if I'm sitting down with the student to discuss academic misconduct, the very first thing I want to do is engage the student. And it's important to engage them because we have to realize that this particular situation of academic misconduct does not represent the totality of the student or who the student is as a person. There's a lot more going on in their life. So if I sit down with a student, I'd like to say, how's your semester going? How are your classes going? How are things going in the COVID environment? Really making that connection with the student to let them know that I care about who they are as a person. And then after I've engaged them and talked to them to make sure that I've made that connection, then I like to identify why we're here. So have a conversation about what you see. So if it's plagiarism, you want to describe what you see and then describe, maybe show an example where you show the comparison where the words are verbatim, if they're verbatim, talk about what the university's policy is. But then after you do that, you want to go back to the student experience and have them reflect. So does their actions represent their values? Does it represent the institution's values? Does it represent how they would want to be represented if someone else was using their work? And so after I've engaged them to let them know that I care about them, I've helped them identify why they're there. We've reflected on their values and the situation. Then I like to talk about the action that we're going to take. And what I found is that when you can couch conversations in that manner, so engage, identify, reflect, and then talk about the actions that'll be taken, that's much more of a transformative experience for students. Even if the sanction is a XF, F star, failure in the course, of something of that nature, or even if it's a 0 on the assignment, those things are important, because when you do that, you really find out if it's a skills issue or if it's not a skills issue, and you really begin to identify how you can best help the student.
I would echo much of what James said there as far as my personal approach, but I would add one component to that is I also like to include in my conversation of, let's talk about the impact beyond just you. So many times I hear students talk about academic integrity issues as it was just impacting me because I'm the one that's getting the F on the assignment, or I'm the one failing the class. Well, actually, no. Let's talk about the other students who put the time and effort into study for the assignment. Let's talk about the other author whose work you did not give due credit for. What about the professor and the efforts and the hard work that they put into their work? So let's talk a lot about that beyond just the personal impact, but those around you that have been impacted. That kind of pro-social focus. That's a big goal of mine, whether they be academic integrity, personal integrity, or conduct code related matters, is helping the students to see the big picture as to those around them are also being impacted, not just you, because you're the one sitting in the chair across from me having this conversation and running the risk of having sanctions or intervention measures put in place. But I think that's a critical piece to any of these conversations, is the big picture impact. And then trying to tie it later on to, okay, 3 years, 4 years, 2 years down the road when you graduate, what is that going to look like? You know, if you run behind on your light bill, what's the impact there? If you are procrastinating on getting this work assignment done, what are the risks associated with that? And trying to help them see the big picture even beyond just the number of years they're at college. Those are two goals that I strive for when I'm meeting with those students.
Something that I'll add that we found to be a really effective model with our educational approaches with students is to really kind of separate our roles within my office. And of course, this depends on what kind of structure you have, but it could work in a lot of different environments, even with faculty who are addressing the behaviors directly without a centralized office or honor code. But we try to have the person who met with the student initially for a conduct-focused meeting not be the same person who then has an educational reflection meeting with the student at the conclusion of the process. Because so often, James, you've mentioned a couple of times, just by its nature, this can be an antagonistic process, and students perceive it that way, no matter how hard we try to be positive and to create those teachable moments. And so we've really found that students are more reflective and more willing to talk about what happened on the back end after they've done some educational tutorials and so on, when they meet with someone totally different than the first person that they had contact with. And that's just something that we've implemented to make sure that those educational moments are as meaningful as possible. And again, I could see that working on an honor council kind of situation, having someone, providing the student an opportunity to meet with someone else on the council after the whole process had wrapped up, just to reflect. If a faculty member brings an allegation, they could ask a trusted colleague who also had a good relationship with the student to have that conversation. And it also reinforces that we're all in this together. We all care about this. That it's not just one person saying this matters to me, it's our institutions saying we all care about this and we want to help you succeed and learn from this.
And that's a good way. What Azalea just mentioned is another good way to engage faculty and students on your campus in the process. So one of the things that Virginia Tech does is that they have honor council delegates who are trained in the honor system. And what they do is they communicate with students throughout the process. So they'll talk to them about the process and have those reflective conversations at the end of the process. They also have students who serve on hearing panels, but these students are I don't like using the word advisor because I think that sometimes when we hear the word advisor, we automatically assume that they're to help them adjudicate and advocate for their case, but really someone who talks them through the process and helps them engage in that transformative learning experience. And then if you have someone available who is a senior faculty member or someone who is respected amongst the faculty, to be able to have those post conversations with with an instructor after the process has concluded, those things are also very helpful because it allows it to be a learning experience for both the instructor and the student.
I also think that what Dr. Orr and Dr. Scruggs and Dr. Holbert is very important. I also think that it's important that we have these conversations about the social cost of academic integrity violations before the student comes to us. So whether that involves programming or creative little infographics to post on social media to ensure that the students are aware of what they're getting into even before they come to us. And I think that that will help in terms of making sure that the students, say, okay, like if I'm going to do this, like this is what's down the line for me.
I'm just boggled by all the great stuff that's coming through this panel. This is really amazing. We have a little less than 10 minutes left, so it's time for speed round. Not really, but what I do want to do is ask each of the panelists to hit on the main theme of the panel, which is the rapid changes that we've all experienced in the last year. So if you can pick one of the things that has changed, and I would like to be very practical here. What's one practical thing that you have changed or have witnessed changing, and good, bad, or ugly? What would have you learned from that change? So, and Azalea, Nina, James, and Matt in that order.
All right, so I will say that this year has highlighted the integral role of technology in the work that we do. Higher ed and at many institutions has been hesitant to embrace technology, to embrace online learning. And I think that there's incredible value in face-to-face instruction. I'm a huge proponent of that, but I also plan to take forward from this that we really do need to use technology more. We need to use it in its appropriate way to enhance our work, not to rely on it, but to really help us in terms of connecting with larger audiences, with making our lives simpler, but we cannot lose that human connection. We have to keep that.
I think similar to what Dr. Hilbert said, in maintaining engagement and being creative in how we engage with our student population, and ensuring that there are multiple touch points for students to be aware of our processes and also their resources and what they can do to prevent themselves from getting in a compromising situation before us, and just having the tools that they need to succeed overall in their classes, even during this difficult time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question too, because having worked so many years directly with academic integrity and then working in the seat that I sit in now, it makes me look at it a little bit differently. And I think that Nina's point about engagement and focusing on overall student success is critical for institutions during this time period, and using technology to promote student success. However, in many ways, and that may be that technology actually makes it easier for us to set up Zoom meetings to talk to students, or another platform one-on-one. It makes it easier in our writing centers or in our tutoring centers to be able to give advising and tutoring. So really thinking about stepping back, it's caused me to step back and look at all the processes and all of our assumptions that we assumed had to be face-to-face. And so if we're ever able to get back to some semblance of normalcy, what I'd like to do is just say, okay, what usages of technology can we still use? So can we still offer some of our presentations virtually so that faculty can sit in their office and maybe they're working on an article but still hearing about academic integrity. So how do we do that?
I would agree with all the points that my colleagues made, especially the engagement component and the reflection on current processes and how they may carry over into post-COVID times. So if I were to add anything new, one thing that I have really has been inspiring to see is how is the peer-to-peer accountability. We have an online anonymous reporting forum that we've had pre-COVID, but students, they want to be on campus. They want to be in person. And when they see other students that are deviating from expectations, they are reaching out to support systems, campus security, dean of students to ask for help in holding those other students accountable so that way we can stay safe and stay open. And I would love to see that same level of peer-to-peer accountability carry over post-COVID in this house is having a large get together where there may be some underage consumption, or I know that my classmates are sharing notes back and forth. Professor, I need you to do something. And seeing, I'd love to see that carry over from what they're doing now with COVID deviations, holding students accountable to abide by those expectations, to other deviations that fall within the honor code and student conduct code.
Wow, you took speed round to heart. Well, let me wrap up by giving a thought or two about everything that we've heard today, and to add one more perspective, which is the faculty perspective, which every single one of our panelists mentioned how important faculty are to academic integrity. And I'd like to point out that academic integrity is not just the absence of cheating. It's a positive set of values, say the fundamental values, that teach our students how to be ethical people in the world. It also means authentic learning. The opposite of cheating is learning, not cheating. And so as faculty and as those of us who work with faculty on student learning, the thing that I take the most away from this pandemic is that a lot of the things we were doing have been unexamined for a long time. At the very beginning of the session, James pointed out that there may not be that much of a rise in cheating, as much as it's a lot easier to see when it's done online, and that we look for it in different ways. I suspect both of those things are probably true for the record, and I think James probably does as well. So the question is for all of us at our institutions is, how do we move away from, as Doug Harrison calls it, a deficit mindset that cheating happens because something is wrong with a student, to the question of how do we build the structures that prevent cheating through the alternative, which is authentic learning. And we've seen lots and lots of ways of responding to academic misconduct. And it's really important to think about how do we create that community that Nina talked about that lifts up our students away from academic misconduct. And so there's going to be a lot of good ideas about that in the lightning sessions as well, in the lightning rounds as well. So the next thing that's going to happen is there'll be a short break for 15 minutes, and then starting back up at 2 p.m., there will be lightning round talks, which will begin by using the Zoom links that are in your attendee program. Following another short break, there'll be the ICAI Town Hall with many of the faces you see now, plus some others, where we'll talk a bit about ICAI and what institutions can do to get more involved. Following that, there are some more networking sessions, and then the conference will conclude. I would like to offer my sincere praise and thanks to Doctors Azalea Hulbert, James Orr, and Matt Scruggs, and to my own Honor Council President, Nita Burgess. This was fun, enlightening. I have notes myself for things I want to follow up on. I hope you all do too. Feel free to check all of our email addresses out in the program, and feel free to reach out for more materials. So with that, we will conclude the session and say thank you all very much for your engagement and participation.